The woman was dying. Jim Holloway saw her from the porch, a dark shape crumpled against the gate in the blizzard. November in Montana came down hard, and this storm had been building since dawn, the kind that turned the world white and swallowed sound, the kind that killed. He stood there for 3 seconds, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, watching her try to stand. She got her hands under her, pushed, made it to her knees. Then she fell again. "Walt!" His voice cut through the wind. "Get the wagon, now!" Walt McAllister appeared in the barn doorway, 62 years old, and built from the same leather as his saddle. He took one look at the gate, dropped the bridle he was holding, and ran. Jim was already moving. Down the porch steps, across the yard, snow driving into his face hard enough to sting. The woman had stopped trying to stand. She was on her hands and knees in the drift, head hanging. A canvas bag clutched in one hand, like she'd die before she let it go. He reached her as Walt brought the wagon around. Up close, Jim could see she was young, 30 maybe, dark hair plastered to her face, lips going blue, and her belly round and heavy under her coat. Pregnant. 7 months, maybe 8. "Ma'am," he knelt beside her, "we need to get you inside." Her head came up, brown eyes, unfocused, struggling to see him through the snow and the cold and whatever had driven her to walk 7 miles in a blizzard. "Don't," her voice was barely there. "Don't take me to town. You'll die out here. Then I'll die." She tried to pull away from him, weak as a newborn calf. "But I won't go back." Jim looked at Walt. Walt looked back at him with the expression of a man who'd seen a lot in his life and knew better than to ask questions when seconds mattered. They lifted her into the wagon. She weighed nothing, or maybe the cold had just made her feel that way. Jim climbed in beside her, pulled her against him for warmth. She didn't fight. She didn't have the strength left for fighting. Walt drove fast. The ranch house materialized out of the white, solid, and dark, and permanent. They carried her inside, through the front room, past the kitchen, where Luther Kane was trying to make coffee and failing. Jim kicked open the door to the spare room, the one that hadn't been used since Anna died. They laid her on the bed. Walt built up the fire while Jim pulled off her boots. They were resoled twice, worn through in places, and when he set them aside, he saw her stockings were wet and frozen. "Get blankets," he told Walt, "and hot water." Walt disappeared. Jim stayed, pulling the quilt up over her, watching her breathe. Shallow, too shallow. Her hands were still locked around that canvas bag. Carefully, he pried her fingers loose. The bag was heavy. He set it on the floor by the bed and didn't look inside. Whatever she was carrying, whatever she was running from, it could wait. Her eyes opened, brown, clearer now in the firelight. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something in that look he recognized. The look of someone who'd lost everything and was still trying to figure out how to keep going. "Where am I?" Her voice was stronger. "Stone Creek Ranch, 7 miles north of Red Pine." She closed her eyes. "I made it." "Made it from where?" "Red Pine." She breathed out, slow. "I walked." 7 miles, in a blizzard, pregnant. "Why?" She opened her eyes again. Because the alternative was worse. Before Jim could ask what that meant, Walt came back with blankets and a basin of hot water. They worked in silence, the way men do when they've been working together long enough that words aren't necessary. Warming her hands and feet, getting dry clothes on her, building the fire higher. By the time they were done, she was asleep. Jim stood by the bed looking down at her. A stranger, a pregnant stranger who'd nearly died to avoid going back to whatever she was running from. "Boss?" Walt's voice was quiet. "We keeping her?" Jim thought about it, thought about the empty kitchen and the crew eating beans from cans because none of them could cook worth a damn. Thought about Daniel, 9 years old and angry at the world. Thought about Anna. "Until she's well enough to make her own choice," he said. "Then we'll see." They left her sleeping and went to the kitchen. Luther was there, big and quiet, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. Luther Kane had been with Jim for 3 years, and in that time, Jim had learned 2 things about him. Luther could shoe a horse better than anyone in the territory, and he didn't talk unless he had something worth saying. "She gonna make it?" Luther asked. "I think so." "Good." Luther nodded at the stove. "We could use a cook." Jim almost smiled. "She hasn't said she can cook. She walked 7 miles in a blizzard. She's got more spine than the last 4 we tried." Luther straightened. "I'm just saying, if she's looking for work, we're looking for help." The door banged open. Tommy Brennan came in, 17 and still growing into his height, snow crusted on his coat and hat. He stopped when he saw their faces. "What happened?" "We got a guest," Walt said. "Woman, half frozen. She's sleeping it off in the spare room." Tommy's eyes went to the hallway. "She gonna be okay?" "She's alive." Jim poured himself coffee that had been sitting too long and tasted like it. "That's all we know right now." They stood there, the 4 of them, in a kitchen that smelled like burned beans and old coffee and the particular loneliness of men living without anyone to cook for them. Outside, the blizzard hammered at the windows. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. Jim thought about the woman in the spare room, about her frozen boots and her canvas bag, and the way she'd said, "I won't go back." He thought about Anna, 2 years in the ground. And he thought about the fact that winter was coming, and the crew needed feeding, and sometimes the answer to a problem walked right up to your gate and collapsed in the snow. Morning came gray and cold. The blizzard had blown itself out, leaving 3 feet of fresh snow, and a silence so complete it hurt the ears. Jim was up before dawn, same as always, building up the fires and starting coffee. He was in the kitchen when he heard footsteps in the hall. She appeared in the doorway, one hand on the frame for balance. The dry clothes they'd put on her last night hung loose. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were steady. "Morning," Jim said. "Morning." She looked around the kitchen, taking it in. The dirty dishes in the basin, the blackened pot on the stove, the general air of men who'd been cooking for themselves and doing it badly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I walked 7 miles in a blizzard." She moved into the room, slow but steady. "Thank you for not taking me to town. You made that pretty clear last night." She nodded, looked at the stove. "Who's been cooking?" "We rotate, mostly Walt." She walked to the stove, peered into the pot Luther had left on the back burner, made a sound that might have been disapproval, opened the cupboard, looked at the supplies: flour, beans, salt, coffee, the basics, nothing more. "What's your name?" Jim asked. "Sarah." She pulled down the flour. "Sarah Brennan. Jim Holloway. This is my ranch." She looked at him for the first time with real attention, took in his height, his weathered face, the way he stood like a man who'd earned his ground and meant to keep it. "I need work, Mr. Holloway." "What kind of work?" "Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing." She set the flour on the counter. "I can start now if you'll let me." Jim looked at her belly. "You're 7 months along, near as I can tell, maybe 8. 7.5. Her hand went to her stomach, brief and protective. "I've got 2 months before I need to stop. That's time enough to prove I'm worth keeping." "Where's your husband, Mrs. Brennan?" Her face changed. Something hard came into it, something that made her look older than 30. "Dead 4 months ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She opened the flour, measured it out by eye. "Do you want breakfast or not?" Jim almost smiled. "What are you making?" "Biscuits, if you have butter and honey." They had both, barely. She worked in silence, her hands steady despite the exhaustion Jim could see in the set of her shoulders. She moved through his kitchen like she'd been doing this her whole life, mixing, kneading, cutting. When the biscuits went into the oven, she turned to the stove and started on gravy. Walt came in first, drawn by the smell. He stopped in the doorway, stared at Sarah, then looked at Jim with raised eyebrows. "Mrs. Brennan," Jim said. "This is Walt McAllister. He runs the day-to-day around here." "Ma'am." Walt took off his hat. "You're looking better than last night." "I'm breathing. That's an improvement." Sarah poured gravy into a bowl. "Biscuits are ready. Sit down." Luther came next, then Tommy. They filled the kitchen with the smell of horses and hay and cold air. They sat at the table without speaking, watching Sarah move between stove and table like she owned the space. When she set the biscuits down, steam rising from the split tops, Jim reached for one without thinking. Broke it open. The inside was soft and layered, the kind of biscuit that took skill and patience to make right. He took a bite. The taste hit him like a fist to the chest. Butter and honey and something else, some trick of temperature or timing that made it perfect. He closed his eyes and saw Anna standing at this same stove, making these same biscuits, smiling over her shoulder at him. When he opened his eyes, Sarah was watching him. "Well," she said. Jim set the biscuit down carefully, looked at Walt, who was already halfway through his second one, looked at Luther and Tommy, eating like men who hadn't tasted real food in months. "You're hired," he said, "if you want the job." Something eased in her face. Not quite relief, not quite triumph, just the look of someone who'd been holding their breath and could finally let it out. "I want it. Pay is fair, room and board. You can keep the spare room you're in." Jim paused. "But I need to know what you're running from." Sarah's hand went still on the serving spoon. The kitchen went quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "A man named Victor Drummond," she said. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. Walt's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Luther went rigid. Tommy looked between them, sensing the shift without understanding it. Jim kept his face neutral. "We know Drummond." "Then you know what he is." "I know he's been trying to buy this land for 2 years. I know he doesn't take no for an answer." Jim leaned back in his chair. "What's he to you?" Sarah set the spoon down. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but Jim heard the effort it cost her. "My husband owned a small property south of Red Pine, 20 acres. Drummond wanted it for the water rights." She looked down at her hands. "Michael said no, said the land was our son's inheritance. Drummond kept pushing, kept offering. Then one day Michael rode into town and didn't come back." The kitchen stayed silent. Outside, a crow called. Inside, the fire popped. "They said it was self-defense. Said Michael drew first." Sarah's voice didn't waver. "But my husband was a farmer, Mr. Holloway. He didn't even own a gun." Jim felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Drummond shot him?" "No, one of his men. But Drummond was there. Drummond was always there." She looked up, met his eyes. "After Michael died, Drummond came to the house. Said my husband had debts. Said I owed $2,000. Said I could work it off. She didn't say how. She didn't have to. I took what I could carry and left," Sarah said. "I heard you needed a cook. I walked." Jim looked at her for a long moment. Pregnant widow, running from the richest man in the territory, with nothing but a canvas bag and the clothes on her back. Either the bravest woman he'd ever met or the most desperate. Maybe both. "Mrs. Brennan," he said slowly, "Drummond's been circling this ranch for 2 years. If you stay here, he'll find out. And when he does, he'll use you to get to me. I know. You'll be putting yourself in danger. I'm already in danger, Mr. Holloway. At least here I'll have a roof and honest work." She straightened her shoulders. "And maybe, if we're both fighting the same man, we'll have better odds than fighting alone." Walt made a sound that might have been approval. Luther nodded slowly. Tommy just stared at Sarah like she'd grown a second head. Jim thought about Anna, about the doctor who'd come to the house 2 years ago, sent by Drummond, offering free medicine for her headaches. About the fever that came on so fast and so hard, the real doctor couldn't stop it. About the grave on the hill and the son who hadn't spoken 3 words together since his mother died. He thought about Victor Drummond, with his fine suits and his lawyers and his belief that everything had a price. "All right," Jim said, "you can stay, but there's something you should know." "What?" Before he could answer, the back door opened. Raphael Drummond walked in, snow on his boots, his dark eyes going straight to Sarah. He froze. "Rafe," Jim said, "we have a new cook, Sarah Brennan." Rafe looked at Jim. Something passed between them, some wordless communication built on 5 years of working together. "Ma'am," Rafe said quietly. He took off his hat. Raphael Drummond. People call me Rafe. Sarah went white. Drummond? I know. Rafe's voice was steady. But I'm not my brother. Haven't been for 5 years. Jim watched Sarah process this. Watched her look at Rafe, then at Jim, then back at Rafe. Watched her make the same calculation Jim had made 5 years ago when a stranger rode up to the ranch and asked for work. You're the wrangler, she said. The one who never goes to town? That's right. Because your brother is there. Because my brother is everywhere, Rafe set his hat on the table. Mrs. Brennan, I left Victor because I didn't want to be part of what he was building. I came here because Jim Holloway is the only man in this territory who told Victor no and lived to regret it. Lived to regret it, Sarah repeated. That's an interesting way to put it. It's the truth. Rafe pulled out a chair, sat down with the careful movements of a man who knew he was walking on thin ice. Victor doesn't kill people who oppose him. He ruins them, takes their land, their livelihood, their reputation, leaves them alive to watch everything they built turn to dust. He looked at Jim. He's been doing it to Jim for 2 years, ever since Jim's wife died. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah looked at Jim with new understanding in her eyes. Your wife, she said softly. How did she die? Jim's hand tightened on his coffee cup. Fever. That's what the doctor said. But you don't believe it. He didn't answer, didn't trust his voice to stay steady. Walt spoke instead. Anna got sick 3 days after Drummond sent his personal physician out here. Said it was a courtesy, seeing as the ranch was so far from town. The doctor gave her medicine for her headaches. Walt's jaw worked. She was dead within the week. Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright with something that looked like rage. Then we are fighting the same man, she said, and I'm staying. The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of normalcy. Sarah cooked. The men worked. The sun came out and turned the snow to diamonds. By evening, the temperature had dropped below zero, and the windows were frosted thick. Jim found Daniel in the barn, mucking stalls with the grim determination of a boy who'd rather be anywhere else. 9 years old, dark-haired like his mother, with Anna's serious eyes, and Jim's stubborn jaw. Daniel. The boy didn't look up. I'm working. I see that. Jim leaned against the stall door. We have a new cook. I heard. Daniel kept shoveling. Walt told me. She's a widow. Her husband died 4 months ago. So she's going to be living here, in the spare room. I thought you should know. Daniel stopped, turned, looked at his father with something that might have been anger, or might have been fear, or might have been both. You're replacing Ma. The words hit harder than Jim expected. No, I'm hiring a cook. In Ma's room. In the spare room. It's been empty for 2 years, Daniel. Because Ma died in it. Daniel's voice cracked. And now you're giving it to some stranger. Jim felt the weight of every mistake he'd made in the last 2 years settle on his shoulders. Every evening he'd worked late to avoid going into an empty house. Every morning he'd left before Daniel woke up. Every moment of grief he'd buried in work instead of sharing with his son. Your mother didn't die in that room, he said quietly. She died in our room, upstairs. You know that. I know you won't talk about her. Daniel threw the shovel down. I know you act like she never existed. That's not true. Isn't it? Daniel's eyes were bright with tears he wouldn't let fall. When's the last time you said her name? When's the last time you told me a story about her? When's the last time you did anything except work and sleep and pretend like everything's fine? Jim had no answer for that, because Daniel was right. He had buried Anna along with his grief, and his son had been left to mourn alone. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was all he had. Daniel wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I don't want a new cook. I don't want some stranger in Ma's space. The spare room isn't Ma's space. It's just a room. Everything in this house is Ma's space. Daniel's voice broke. And you're letting someone else take it. He pushed past Jim and ran, out of the barn, across the yard, into the house. Jim stood there in the cold, listening to his son's boots crunch through the snow, and wondered when he'd lost the ability to say the right thing. When he finally went inside, Sarah was in the kitchen, finishing up the supper dishes. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. Your son doesn't like me, Sarah said without looking up. He doesn't know you. He doesn't want to know me. She set a plate in the rack. He thinks I'm trying to replace his mother. Jim poured himself coffee. Are you? Sarah turned, her eyes sharp. No, Mr. Holloway. I'm trying to survive. Your son's grief isn't about me, and I won't pretend it is. He's 9 years old. I know, and he's angry and scared and looking for someone to blame. She dried her hands on a towel. But I'm not his enemy, and neither are you, even if he thinks you are. Jim looked at her, really looked at her, saw past the exhaustion and the pregnancy and the fear she was hiding, saw strength there, the kind that came from walking through fire and coming out the other side. You have children? He asked. Not yet. Her hand went to her belly. This is my first. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. But I know what it's like to lose someone and not know how to keep breathing. She met his eyes. Your son needs to talk about his mother, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. I don't know how. Then learn. Sarah turned back to the dishes. Because if you don't, you'll lose him too, and that's a grief you won't survive. The words settled into Jim's chest like stones. That night, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thought about Anna and Daniel and Sarah Brennan, thought about Victor Drummond and dead husbands and medicine that killed instead of cured, thought about the fact that he'd just hired a woman who was running from the same man who'd been circling Jim's land like a wolf for 2 years. He should have sent her away, should have given her money and put her on the stage to anywhere else, should have kept his distance from Drummond's war. But he hadn't, because Sarah was right. They were fighting the same man, and alone they'd both lose. Together, maybe they had a chance. He fell asleep thinking about biscuits and Anna's smile and the look in Sarah's eyes when she'd said, I won't go back. Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear. Inside, the fire burned low. And in the spare room, Sarah Brennan lay awake, one hand on her belly, wondering if she'd made the right choice or just traded one danger for another. Time would tell. Time always did. The morning came in cold and white. Jim was up before dawn, same as always, moving through the dark house with the ease of long practice. He built up the fires, started the coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching the sun turn the snow from gray to gold. He heard footsteps behind him. Sarah appeared in the doorway, dressed in one of Anna's old dresses that Walt must have found for her. It hung loose in some places, tight in others. She looked like she hadn't slept much. You're up early, Jim said. So are you. She moved to the stove, checking the fire. I thought ranchers slept until dawn. Not this one. She started pulling things out of the cupboard. Flour, salt, lard. Her movements were efficient, practiced. Why not? Jim didn't answer right away. He poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the counter where she could reach it. Because the quiet is mine, he said finally. Before the ranch wakes up and needs things. It's the only time that belongs to just me. Sarah stopped, looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Understanding, maybe. I know that feeling, she said. They worked in silence after that. Sarah making breakfast, Jim doing the small maintenance tasks that kept a ranch running, fixing a hinge on the cupboard door, tightening the handle on the water pump. Things Anna used to remind him about. Things he'd let slide for 2 years. The crew came in as the sun cleared the mountains. Walt first, then Luther, then Tommy. They filled the kitchen with noise and cold air, and the particular energy of men starting a long day. Daniel came last. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Sarah at the stove. His face closed up, went blank in that way children's faces do when they're feeling too much and showing nothing. Morning, son, Jim said. Daniel didn't answer. He slid into his chair, eyes on the table. Sarah set a plate in front of him. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread. Daniel looked at it like it might bite him. Eat, Sarah said. Not unkind, but not soft either. You've got school. I don't go to school in winter. Daniel's voice was sullen. Roads are too bad. Then you've got chores. Sarah sat down across from him with her own plate. Either way, you need to eat. Daniel picked up his fork. Put it down. Picked it up again. "My ma made better eggs," he said. The kitchen went quiet. Walt and Luther suddenly found their plates very interesting. Tommy looked between Daniel and Sarah like he was watching a snake and didn't know which way it would strike. Sarah just nodded. "I'm sure she did. What did she do different?" Daniel blinked. He'd been expecting anger, maybe, or hurt. Not a genuine question. She added cream," he said slowly. "And chives from the garden. Did it make them fluffy?" "Yeah." "I'll try that tomorrow." Sarah took a bite of her own eggs. "Thank you for telling me." Daniel stared at her. Then, slowly, he started eating. Jim felt something ease in his chest. Not much, but enough. After breakfast, the men scattered to their work. Jim was heading to the barn when Rafe caught up with him. "Boss, need to talk." They walked together, boots crunching in the snow. Rafe didn't speak until they were well away from the house, out by the fence line where the land dropped away toward the creek. "Victor knows," Rafe said. Jim stopped. "How?" "One of his men was in Red Pine yesterday, saw Sarah walking north, put it together." Rafe's face was grim. "He'll be here, today, maybe tomorrow, but he'll come. Let him come." "Jim." Rafe turned to face him. "You don't understand. Sarah Brennan isn't just some widow Victor wants to collect a debt from. Her husband found something, documents, proof that Victor's been falsifying land surveys." Jim went still. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that shows half the water rights claims in this territory are based on fraudulent boundary lines." Rafe looked toward the creek, "Including yours." The cold seemed to deepen. Jim felt it settle into his bones. "Michael Brennan was going to take it to the federal marshal," Rafe continued. "That's why Victor killed him, and that's why he wants Sarah. Because if Michael had that proof, she might have it too." Jim thought about the canvas bag Sarah had been clutching when they found her, the bag she'd nearly died to keep. "Does she?" "I don't know, but Victor thinks she does." Rafe's eyes were dark. "And when Victor comes, he won't be coming to collect a debt. He'll be coming to make sure that proof never sees daylight." Jim looked out over his land. Stone Creek running through it, the water that made this ranch viable, the water Victor wanted. "We need to see what's in that bag," he said. They found Sarah in the laundry room, hanging sheets. Her hands were red from the cold water, her face flushed from the heat of the fire. "Mrs. Brennan," Jim said. "Can we talk?" She looked between him and Rafe, reading something in their faces. "What's wrong?" "Your bag. The one you had when we found you. Where is it?" Sarah's hand went still on the sheet she was hanging. "In my room. Why?" "Because my brother is coming," Rafe said. "And I need to know if you have what he thinks you have." Sarah's face went pale, but she didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded, dried her hands, and led them inside. The canvas bag was under her bed, exactly where she'd put it. Sarah pulled it out, set it on the mattress, and opened it. Inside, a change of clothes, a Bible, a bundle of letters tied with string, and a leather journal worn at the edges, filled with neat handwriting. "Michael's journal," Sarah said quietly. "He kept records. Everything Victor Drummond did, he wrote it down." Jim picked up the journal, opened it to a random page, and read. October 12, 1885. "Drummond's surveyor came today, moved our boundary marker 6 feet east. I moved it back. He said it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake." Another page. November 3, 1885. "Spoke with Henry Carlson. His boundary was moved too, 10 feet north. Drummond now claims the spring on Carlson's property falls on public land. Carlson can't afford a lawyer. He's giving up." Page after page. Dates, names, measurements. A careful documentation of 2 years of fraud. "Jesus," Jim breathed. "There's more." Sarah reached into the bag, pulled out a rolled piece of paper. "This is the original survey map, the real one, from 1880. Michael found it in the county records office. The clerk was retiring. Didn't know it was supposed to be destroyed." She unrolled it. Jim and Rafe leaned in. The boundaries were different, not by much. A few feet here, a dozen yards there, but enough. Enough to shift water rights, to make private land public, to give Victor Drummond legal claim to resources that belonged to other people. "This is why Michael died," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, but Jim could hear what it cost her. He was going to take this to Helena, to the territorial governor. Victor found out. How? Jim asked. Someone talked. Sarah rolled the map back up carefully. Michael trusted the wrong person, and it got him killed. Rafe was very quiet. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Sarah, do you know who Michael told? She looked up at him. The judge, Simon Whitmore. He's the only lawyer in Red Pine. Michael thought he'd help. Jim and Rafe looked at each other. Judge Whitmore, Rafe said slowly, has a son, Thomas Whitmore. He's got a gambling problem, owes money all over the territory. Understanding hit Jim like cold water. Victor paid the debts. Victor always pays the debts. Rafe's face was hard. And then he owns people. Sarah sat down on the bed, her hand on her belly. So the judge told Victor, and Victor killed Michael. Probably. And now Victor wants to make sure this evidence disappears. Yes. She looked up at Jim. What do we do? Jim thought about it. About Anna and fever that wasn't fever. About Michael Brennan and a bullet in the street. About Victor Drummond, who bought judges and moved boundary markers and killed anyone who got in his way. We use it, he said. We take this to someone Victor doesn't own. Who? Federal Marshal. He's based in Helena, but he makes rounds. He'll be in Red Pine in 2 weeks for the circuit court. 2 weeks? Sarah's voice was flat. Victor will be here before then. I know, Jim looked at Rafe. Can you get a message to the marshal without Victor knowing? Maybe. There's a telegraph office in Harlow, 20 miles east. Victor doesn't have people there. Rafe paused. But I can't leave until after Victor's visit. If I disappear now, he'll know something's wrong. Then we wait. Jim looked at Sarah. Keep this hidden. Don't tell anyone else you have it. What about your crew? Walt, Luther, Tommy? They're good men. But the fewer people who know, the safer we all are. Sarah nodded. She gathered the journal and map, put them back in the bag, and slid it under the bed. When she stood, Jim saw her hands were shaking. Mrs. Brennan, he kept his voice gentle, you did the right thing. Running, coming here, all of it. Did I? Her eyes were bright. Because it feels like I just painted a target on your back. That target was already there. Victor's been trying to take this land since before Anna died. Jim glanced at Rafe. Now we know why. The creek, Rafe said. It's the only year-round water source for 50 miles. With climate getting drier, water rights are going to be worth more than the land itself. So Victor's been playing a long game. Victor always plays the long game. Rafe moved to the window, looked out. That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't rush. He just waits for you to make a mistake, and then he takes everything. Jim thought about that, about patience and power and the slow accumulation of both. Then we don't make mistakes, he said. That afternoon, while the men were out working, Sarah found Daniel in the barn. He was in the loft, sitting in the hay, reading a book that looked too advanced for 9 years old. What are you reading? She asked from the ladder. Daniel looked up, startled. For a second, she saw the fear in his face, the same fear she'd seen that morning, the fear of someone new trying to be someone old. Jules Verne, he said. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's a good one. Sarah climbed into the loft, moving carefully with her belly. Your mother read it to you? Daniel's face closed. Yeah. What part are you at? The squid fight. Sarah sat down, keeping distance between them. That's the best part. Your ma have good timing. She stopped before the end. Daniel's voice was very small. She got sick. She never finished it. I'm sorry. They sat in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the barn boards. Somewhere below, a horse stamped and blew. I miss her, Daniel said suddenly. I miss her so much it hurts. Sarah's throat went tight. I know. No, you don't. He looked at her, with eyes too old for his face. Your husband just died. It's still new. It doesn't hurt the same yet. You're right. Sarah kept her voice steady. It doesn't hurt the same, but it still hurts. Daniel pulled his knees up, wrapped his arms around them. Pa won't talk about her. He acts like she never existed. He talks about her, just not out loud. That doesn't help me. I know. Daniel looked at her. Why are you being nice to me? I was mean to you at breakfast. You were scared. That's different than mean. I don't want you here. I know that too. Sarah shifted, easing the weight off her back. But I'm here anyway. And I'm not trying to replace your mother, Daniel. I'm just trying to cook and clean and keep myself and this baby safe, that's all. From the man who killed your husband. Sarah went still. How did you know that? I listened last night when you told Pa. Daniel's eyes were dark. That man, Drummond, did he kill my ma too? The question hung in the cold air. Sarah could have lied, could have said no, could have protected this child from a truth too heavy for 9 years old. But she'd learned something in 4 months of widowhood. Lies didn't protect people. They just made the truth hurt more when it finally came out. I don't know, she said. But your father thinks maybe he did. Daniel absorbed this. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes went hard. Then we should kill him back, he said. Daniel, I mean it. The boy's voice was fierce. He killed Ma. He killed your husband. Why should he get to keep living? Because killing him won't bring them back. Sarah reached out, stopped short of touching him. And because your mother wouldn't want you carrying that kind of darkness. How do you know what Ma would want? I don't. But I know what my husband would want. He'd want me to be smart and careful and alive. He'd want this baby to have a mother. She put her hand on her belly. He wouldn't want me throwing my life away on revenge. Daniel looked at her hand, at the curve of her stomach. Is it a boy or a girl? He asked. I don't know. What will you name it? I haven't decided. Sarah paused. Do you have any suggestions? Daniel thought about it. If it's a girl, you should name her after Ma, Anna. Something in Sarah's chest went tight. That's a good name. Yeah. Daniel looked back at his book. Ma liked it. They sat together in the hay, not talking, just breathing the same air. Below, the horses moved in their stalls. Above, the wind sang through the rafters. After a while, Sarah stood. I should get back to work. Daniel nodded. Then, just as she reached the ladder, he said, Mrs. Brennan? Yes? Thank you for not lying to me. Sarah looked at him, this small, fierce, broken boy who'd lost his mother and didn't know how to survive it. You're welcome, Daniel. She climbed down and walked back to the house, her hand on her belly, thinking about names and truth and the weight children carried when the adults in their lives tried to protect them from reality. Behind her, Daniel opened his book and kept reading. That night after supper, after the crew had gone to the bunkhouse and Daniel was in bed, Jim found himself on the porch again. The cold was brutal, well below zero, but he stood there anyway, looking at the stars. He heard the door open behind him, knew without looking it was Sarah. You'll freeze, she said. I'll come in soon. But she came out anyway, wrapped in one of Anna's old coats, stood beside him, not touching, just present. They didn't speak for a long time, just stood there in the cold, breathing out clouds, watching the stars turn overhead. Finally, Sarah said, Your son asked me about my baby today. Did he? He suggested I name it Anna, if it's a girl. Jim felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 2 years. She would have liked that, he said. His voice came out rough. I know. Sarah was quiet for a moment. He misses her, Jim. He needs to talk about her. I don't know how. Start with her name. Sarah looked at him. Say it out loud. Tell him stories. Let him see that you loved her too. I can't. The words came out harder than he meant. Every time I try, I see her dying. I see that fever taking her piece by piece, and I see myself standing there useless, watching it happen. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Jim turned to face her. Drummond's doctor brought that medicine. I let him into our house. I let Anna take it. I killed her. No, Sarah's voice was fierce. Victor Drummond killed her, the same way he killed Michael. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. I should have. Jim's hands clenched. I should have been more careful, should have protected her better. You can't protect people from poison you don't know is poison. Sarah reached out, touched his arm, light, brief. You can only learn from it and make sure it doesn't happen again. Jim looked at her hand on his coat. looked at her face, pale in the starlight, lined with her own grief. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going?" "I don't have a choice." Sarah's hand fell away. "I have a baby coming. That baby needs a mother. So I get up every morning and I keep moving, because stopping means giving up, and I'm not ready to give up yet. Even though it hurts. Especially because it hurts." She looked up at the stars. "Michael used to say pain is just proof you're still alive. Dead things don't hurt." They stood there in the cold. After a while, Jim said, "Anna used to make biscuits every Sunday with honey and butter, just like you made this morning. Daniel loved them." Sarah nodded, didn't speak. She sang while she cooked. Old songs, hymns mostly. Drove me crazy sometimes, but I'd give anything to hear it again. What was her favorite? "Amazing Grace." Jim's voice was barely there. "She sang it the morning before she got sick. I can still hear her voice." Sarah waited, gave him space to fill with words or silence, whichever he needed. "I loved her," Jim said. "I loved her so much. And when she died, I thought the loving would die too. But it didn't. It's still here, still hurting. That's how you know it was real." Jim looked at her. "Is that what you tell yourself?" "Every day." Sarah's eyes were bright. "Every day I wake up and Michael's still gone, and the baby's still coming, and I'm still scared. But the loving is still here, so I know it meant something." They stood together on the porch while the stars turned overhead and the temperature dropped, and the wind sang through the pines. Two people, both carrying grief, both learning how to keep walking with the weight of it. Finally, Sarah said, "I'm going in. It's too cold. I'll be in soon." But this time he was. 5 minutes later, he came into it, closed the door, and went to find Daniel. The boy was still awake, reading by lamplight. "Daniel," Jim said from the doorway. Daniel looked up. "Your mother," Jim said slowly. "She would have loved that you're reading her favorite book." Daniel's eyes went wide. "And she would have been proud of you for being kind to Mrs. Brennan today, for suggesting her name for the baby." Jim's voice caught. "Your ma was the best person I ever knew. And every time I look at you, I see her looking back." Daniel's lip trembled. "You never talk about her." "I know." Jim sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry. I thought not talking about her would make it hurt less, but it just made it lonely." "It's so lonely, Pa." Daniel's voice broke. "It's so lonely missing her by myself." Jim pulled his son into his arms, felt the boy shudder with sobs he'd been holding for 2 years. "I miss her too," Jim said into Daniel's hair. "Every single day. I miss her so much." They held each other and cried, father and son both learning how to grieve out loud. Down the hall, Sarah heard it through her door, heard the sound of healing starting, slow and painful and necessary. She put her hand on her belly and thought about Anna Holloway, who'd loved biscuits and hymns and this small, fierce boy. "I'll take care of them," she whispered. "I promise." Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear. Inside, the fire burned low. And somewhere in Red Pine, Victor Drummond was planning his next move. But on Stone Creek Ranch, for the first time in 2 years, a father and son were learning how to remember together. It was a start. Victor Drummond came on a Thursday. Jim saw the wagon from the north pasture, black against the snow, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed the world would wait for him. 2 horses, good stock, a driver, and 2 passengers. Even from a distance, Jim could feel the weight of it. He rode back to the ranch at a gallop. Walt was in the yard, mending fence. He looked up when Jim came in, hard, read his face, and set down his tools without a word. "He's here," Jim said. "How many?" "3 that I saw, maybe more in town." Walt nodded, whistled sharp. Luther appeared from the barn, then Tommy from the hen house. Rafe was already there, standing in the shadow of the porch like he'd been waiting. "Get Sarah inside," Jim told Walt. "Keep her there. Keep Daniel with her." "What are you going to do?" "Talk." Jim swung down from his horse. "Just talk." But he checked his rifle before he leaned it against the porch rail, and the crew noticed. The wagon rolled through the gate 5 minutes later. Victor Drummond sat in the back seat like it was a throne, dressed in a suit that cost more than most men made in a year. Beside him, a thin, nervous man clutching a leather case. The driver was broad and mean-looking, the kind of man who got paid to stand behind people and look threatening. Jim walked out to meet them. Rafe stayed on the porch, visible, but separate. Luther and Tommy flanked the barn. Walt was inside with Sarah and Daniel. The wagon stopped. Victor climbed down with the easy movements of a man who spent his days in offices, not saddles. He was 42, handsome in a cold way, with gray threading his dark hair and eyes that calculated the value of everything they saw. Jim. Victor's voice was warm, friendly, the voice of a man greeting an old friend. Good to see you. Victor. Jim kept his voice neutral. Unexpected visit. Is it? Victor smiled. I heard you hired a new cook. Thought I'd come to see if the rumors were true. They're true. I hired a cook. Sarah Brennan. Victor said the name like he was tasting it. Poor widow. Terrible what happened to her husband. Yes, it was. Shot in the street. Self-defense, they said. Victor's eyes were steady on Jim's face. But you know how these things are. Stories get confused. Witnesses remember things differently. Jim said nothing. Victor turned, gestured to the nervous man. This is Mr. Aldridge, county surveyor. We're updating the land registry, making sure all the boundaries are accurate. My boundaries are accurate. Have been for 20 years. Of course, of course. Victor's smile never wavered. But the territory's growing. New regulations, federal oversight. You understand. Mr. Aldridge just needs to confirm a few measurements. Won't take more than an hour. Jim looked at the surveyor, looked at his leather case, thought about Michael Brennan's journal, about boundary markers moved in the night, about fraud documented page by careful page. No, he said. Victor's smile thinned. I'm sorry? No survey on my land without my lawyer present. Jim, Victor's voice was still warm, but something cold moved behind his eyes. This is a territorial matter. Mr. Aldridge is appointed by the county. You can't refuse. I can, and I am. Jim crossed his arms. My lawyer's name is George Whitmore. He's in Harlow. I'll have him here by Monday. You can survey then. The silence stretched. Victor looked at Jim. Jim looked back. Behind Victor, the driver's hand drifted toward his coat. That won't be necessary, Rafe said from the porch. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Will it, Victor? Victor turned, saw his brother standing there, and something flickered across his face. Not surprise, recognition, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Raphael, Victor's voice was soft. Still playing ranch hand? Still playing tyrant? I prefer visionary. Victor smiled. Someone has to drag this territory into the modern age. These small ranchers, clinging to their little patches of dirt, they don't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture where you own everything? The bigger picture where resources are used efficiently, where water goes to those who can make the best use of it. Victor looked back at Jim. No offense, Jim, but you're running what, 200 head, 300? I could run 5,000 on this land with proper irrigation, proper management. This land's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Victor's smile was back. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Then you haven't found it. Victor studied him. Then he turned to the surveyor. Mr. Aldridge, I think we're done here. The surveyor looked relieved. He climbed back into the wagon without a word. Victor paused before following. Jim, a word of advice from one businessman to another. I'm not a businessman. I'm a rancher. Exactly. Victor's voice dropped. And ranchers need water. Stone Creek's been reliable so far, but we're heading into a dry year. Very dry. By October, that creek's going to be running low. By November, you'll be hauling water from town. I'll manage. Will you? Victor glanced at the house. You've got a crew to feed, livestock to water, and now a pregnant widow and a child to care for. That's a lot of mouths depending on that creek. The threat was so casual it almost sounded like concern. Get off my land, Jim said quietly. Victor held his gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled again, that cold, calculated smile, and climbed into the wagon. One more thing, he called as the driver turned the horses. Give my regards to Mrs. Brennan. Tell her the debt her husband owed hasn't been forgotten, $2,000 plus interest. I'm willing to be patient, but patience has its limits. The wagon rolled away. Jim stood in the yard, watching it go, feeling the weight of that conversation settle into his bones. Rafe came down from the porch. He knows about the journal. How? He wouldn't be pushing this hard if he didn't. Rafe looked toward the creek. The surveyor was just an excuse. He wanted to see if you'd fight. Now he knows you will. So what's his next move? He'll go after the water. Rafe's voice was grim. He'll file a claim saying your boundaries are wrong, that the creek falls on public land. Then he'll offer to buy you out. When you refuse, he'll wait for the drought to do his work for him. Jim thought about that. About summer heat and falling water levels and livestock dying of thirst. How long do we have? Until the circuit court next month. That's when he'll file. Rafe paused. Unless we move first. With what? Michael's journal? With me. Rafe met his eyes. I can testify. I know how Victor operates. I watched him do it for 10 years before I left. He's your brother. He stopped being my brother the day he killed my wife. The words fell between them like stones. Jim had known Rafe for 5 years. In that time, Rafe had never mentioned a wife, never mentioned family at all, except to say he'd left them behind. Tell me, Jim said. So Rafe did. They walked while he talked, out past the barn, down to the creek where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Rafe stood on the bank, staring at the water, and his voice was steady, but his hands shook. Her name was Elena. We married young. She was 19. I was 21. Rafe's jaw worked. Victor was already building his empire, buying land, consolidating power. He wanted me to help, wanted the family united. You refused. I tried to walk the middle, keep the peace. Rafe's laugh was bitter. But Victor doesn't do middle ground. You're with him or against him. When I wouldn't help him pressure a homesteader off his land, Victor decided to teach me a lesson about loyalty. Jim waited. Elena got sick, started out like a cold, then fever, then she couldn't keep food down. Rafe's voice went rough. Doctor said it was cholera. But cholera doesn't start slow like that. Cholera hits fast and hard. Poison. I think so, but I couldn't prove it. By the time I figured it out, she was gone. Rafe turned to look at Jim. 3 days after the funeral, Victor came to see me, said he was sorry for my loss, said the homesteader had decided to sell after all, said things had worked out for the best. Jesus. I left that night, took my horse and whatever I could carry and rode until I couldn't see his land anymore. Rafe's eyes were dark. 5 years I've been running, 5 years of looking over my shoulder waiting for him to come after me, but he never did. You know why? Jim thought he knew. Because you leaving was punishment enough. Because I was already dead to him. Rafe's voice was flat. The moment I chose Elena over his plans, I stopped being his brother. He killed her to prove a point. And when I left, the point was made. They stood by the creek, listening to water move over stone. Why tell me this now? Jim asked. Because Sarah's in the same position Elena was. She has something Victor wants, and he'll kill her to get it, same as he killed Elena, same as he killed Anna. Rafe looked at him. You asked what his next move is. His next move is making you watch someone else you care about die, and then offering to buy the land cheap when you can't stand the ghosts anymore. Jim felt his stomach turn to ice, not fear, something harder, colder. Then we don't let him, he said. That night, Jim sat in his room staring at a box he kept under the bed. Anna's things. Letters, photographs, small treasures she'd collected. He hadn't opened it in 2 years. Now he pulled it out, opened the lid, and started going through it. There, at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a small brown bottle. The medicine Victor's doctor had brought. The medicine for Anna's headaches. Jim had kept it. He didn't know why. Couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Couldn't bring himself to look at it. So he'd hidden it here, in the box with Anna's things, and tried to forget it existed. Now he held it up to the lamplight. The liquid inside was dark, murky. The label read, "For headache and nervous tension, take 1 spoonful morning and night." Anna had taken it for 3 days before the fever started. Jim wrapped the bottle back in its cloth, put it in his pocket, and went downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread. Her hands moved in steady rhythm, pushing and folding, working the tension out of the flour. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up. "Not yet." Jim pulled out a chair. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. When Michael got sick, before he died, did he have symptoms before he was shot?" Sarah's hands slowed. "What kind of symptoms? Headaches? Stomach trouble? Weakness?" Sarah turned to look at him. Her face was careful, controlled. "Why are you asking?" Jim pulled the bottle from his pocket, set it on the table between them. Sarah stared at it. Her face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Victor's doctor gave it to Anna for headaches." Jim's voice was steady. "She took it for 3 days. Then the fever started." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "Michael had headaches," she said slowly, "the month before he died. Bad ones. He went to town, saw a doctor. The doctor gave him medicine." "What doctor?" "I don't know. He didn't say. Just came home with a bottle and started taking it." Her eyes were bright. "The headaches got worse. Then he started having stomach trouble. Couldn't keep food down. I wanted to call for the doctor in Harlow, but Michael said it would pass." "When did he go to town? To confront Victor?" "A week after the medicine started." Sarah's voice shook. "He was feeling better that day. He said the medicine must be working. He rode into town to meet with Judge Whitmore, to show him the journal, and he never came back." "No." A tear slid down Sarah's cheek. "They brought his body home that evening. Said he'd drawn on one of Victor's men. Said it was self-defense." Jim looked at the bottle, thought about Anna, about Michael, about sickness that started slow and looked natural. "I need to get this analyzed," he said. "Find out what's in it." "How?" "There's a doctor in Helena, real doctor, not one of Victor's. He does chemical analysis for the territorial court." Jim wrapped the bottle back up. "I'll take it to him. That's a 3-day ride." "I know. Victor will know you're gone. He'll come here. I know that too." Jim met her eyes. "But I need proof, not just suspicions. Proof that will hold up in court." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Then I'm coming with you. You're 7 months pregnant. And I'm the only other person who saw Michael take that medicine. I'm the only one who can testify that his symptoms match your wife's." Her voice was steel. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. That means both of us." Jim wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, too difficult. But he looked at her face and saw the same thing he'd seen the day she walked through his gate in a blizzard. Determination, the kind that didn't bend. "All right," he said. "We leave at first light." They left before dawn, while the stars were still bright and the air was cold enough to burn. Jim on horseback, Sarah in the wagon with blankets and supplies. They told the crew they were going to Harlow for legal business. Only Rafe knew the truth. "I'll keep watch," Rafe said as they prepared to leave. "If Victor comes, I'll send Tommy to find you." "If Victor comes, don't engage. Just keep everyone safe." "I know." Rafe handed Jim a rifle. 3 days there, 3 days back. You sure you can make that?" Jim looked at Sarah, bundled in the wagon, her hand on her belly. "We'll make it." They did. Barely. The road to Helena was rough, rutted with ice and snow. Sarah held on while the wagon bounced and jolted, her face pale but determined. They stopped every few hours to rest the horses, to let Sarah walk and stretch. Jim watched her with growing concern. This was madness, dragging a pregnant woman 3 days through winter to analyze a bottle of poison. But Sarah never complained, never asked to turn back. On the second night, camped in a stand of pines, she finally spoke about it. "You think I'm crazy," she said, "risking the baby like this." Jim was quiet for a moment. "I think you're brave." "Brave and crazy aren't mutually exclusive." Sarah pulled her blanket tighter. "But if I don't do this, if I don't see it through, then Michael died for nothing. And I can't live with that. Even if it cost you everything?" "I already lost everything." She looked at him across the fire. "The only thing I have left is the truth. And I'm not letting Victor Drummond take that too." They reached Helena on the 3rd day, just as the sun was setting. The doctor, a thin, precise man named Garrett, took the bottle without comment. Said he'd need 2 days for a full analysis. Jim and Sarah found a boarding house, 2 rooms side by side. That night, lying in a strange bed listening to Sarah move in the next room, Jim thought about Anna, about the last time he'd seen her smile, about the way she'd trusted that medicine, trusted him to keep her safe. He thought about Victor Drummond sitting in his fine house, moving people like chess pieces, killing with patience and poison instead of bullets. And he thought about the fact that soon, very soon, he'd have proof. And proof changed everything. The doctor came through on schedule. Jim and Sarah sat in his office, watching him arrange papers on his desk with the methodical care of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. "The sample you brought me," Dr. Garrett said, "contains arsenic, a substantial amount, mixed with laudanum to mask the taste." Sarah made a sound. Jim reached for her hand without thinking, held it tight. "How much arsenic?" Jim asked. "Enough to kill, given time. The dosage in a single spoonful wouldn't be immediately fatal, but taken twice daily for a week?" Dr. Garrett looked at them over his spectacles. "It would mimic fever, weakness, vomiting, delirium. Most doctors would diagnose it as influenza or typhoid. Can you testify to that?" "I can, and I will." Dr. Garrett slid a paper across the desk. "This is my full report. Chemical composition, dosage calculations, expected symptoms. It will hold up in any court." Jim took the paper with shaking hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Dr. Garrett's face was grave. "Proving the medicine is poisoned is one thing. Proving who made it, who distributed it, that's harder. Do you have evidence connecting this bottle to a specific person?" "The doctor who gave it to my wife. He works for Victor Drummond." "Works for or employed by?" Jim paused. "I don't know. Find out. Get a statement. Otherwise, a good lawyer will argue the medicine was tampered with after it left the doctor's hands. That you or your wife added the arsenic." Dr. Garrett's eyes were steady. "I'm sorry, but that's how these men operate. They build in deniability." Sarah spoke for the first time. "The doctor who treated my husband, do you know him?" "What was his name?" "Michael never said, but he had an office in Red Pine. Small practice. Mostly did house calls." Dr. Garrett thought. "Red Pine only has 2 doctors. Old Doc Hendricks, been there 40 years. And a newer fellow came about 3 years ago, Nathan Cross." "Cross?" Sarah's voice was tight. "That's the name. I remember now. Michael said Dr. Cross was very helpful." "Dr. Cross is Victor Drummond's personal physician," Dr. Garrett said quietly. "He came to Montana 3 years ago. Before that, he was in Chicago. Lost his medical license for prescribing dangerous medications." Jim and Sarah looked at each other. "How do we prove Cross gave the poison knowingly?" Jim asked. "You get him to confess." Dr. Garrett stood. "Or you find someone else he's done it to, someone who survived." They rode back faster than they'd come, pushed the horses harder, stopped less often. Sarah gritted her teeth through the bouncing, her hands pressed to her belly. Jim watched her with growing alarm, but she waved him off. "I'm fine, keep moving." They made it back to Stone Creek Ranch in 2.5 days. Jim saw the smoke from the chimney, the lights in the windows, and felt relief wash through him. Then he saw Rafe waiting by the gate, and the relief died. "What happened?" Jim swung down from his horse. "Victor came, yesterday morning." Rafe's face was grim. "He brought the sheriff. Said there'd been a complaint filed against the ranch. Water theft." "Water theft?" "Claims you've been diverting more than your legal share from Stone Creek. Wants an injunction to limit your usage while it's investigated." Rafe handed Jim a paper. "Circuit judge signed it. You're limited to 50 gallons a day until the hearing." Jim read the injunction, felt rage build in his chest, cold and hard. 50 gallons won't even water the livestock." "I know." Rafe looked toward the house. "There's more. While the sheriff was here, Victor asked to see Sarah. Said he had business with her." "Did she see him?" "Walt wouldn't let him in. Victor got angry, started making threats." Rafe's jaw tightened. "Said if Sarah didn't pay her debt, he'd have her arrested for theft. Said the law was very clear about widows inheriting their husbands' obligations." "Where is she now?" "Inside, with Daniel. She's been scared, Jim. She won't say it, but I can see it." Jim looked at the house, at the warm light in the windows, at the place that was supposed to be safe. "It's time," he said. "Time for what?" "To go on offense." Jim pulled Dr. Garrett's report from his saddlebag. "We have proof. We have testimony. We have everything we need to end this. Except a judge who isn't bought." Rafe's voice was flat. "Whitmore won't help us. The circuit judge is in Victor's pocket. Who's going to hear the case?" Jim thought about that, about corruption and power and the way money bought justice in territories where law was still young and flexible. Then he remembered something Dr. Garrett had said about federal oversight, about the territory growing up. "The U.S. Marshal," he said, "he's not territorial. He's federal. Victor can't buy him. The Marshal's in Helena, and he doesn't come to Red Pine except for circuit court. Then we go to him." Jim looked at Rafe. "Can you hold things here for 3 more days?" "If I have to." "You have to." Jim started toward the house. "Because we're about to make a lot of noise, and when Victor hears it, he's going to come hard. Let him come." Rafe's voice was cold. "I've been waiting 5 years for this." Jim found Sarah in the kitchen, teaching Daniel how to make bread. Her face lit up when she saw him, then fell when she read his expression. "What's wrong?" "Victor was here, filed an injunction." Jim set Dr. Garrett's report on the table. "But we have this. Chemical proof that Anna was poisoned. Testimony from a federal doctor." Sarah read the report. Her hands shook. "This is it," she breathed. "This is what we need. It's part of it, but we need more." Jim looked at Daniel. "Son, can you give us a minute?" Daniel looked between them, then nodded and left. When they were alone, Jim said, "We need to find Dr. Cross. Get him to testify that Victor ordered the poison. He won't talk. He will if the alternative is hanging for murder." Jim's voice was hard. "Cross is a coward. Cowards talk when they're scared enough." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What if he runs? What if we go to arrest him and he's already gone? Then we use what we have, the report, the testimony, Michael's journal. We take it to the federal marshal and we make so much noise that Victor can't silence it. And if that's not enough?" Jim looked at her, really looked at her, saw the fear she was trying to hide, the exhaustion, the weight of carrying a child and a dead husband's legacy, and the hope that justice might actually exist. "Then we make it enough," he said. Outside, the Montana night settled in. Inside, 2 people who'd lost everything made a plan to take back what had been stolen. And in Red Pine, Victor Drummond sat in his study, reading a telegram from Helena, and smiled. Because Jim Holloway had just made his first mistake. He'd shown his hand. Morning came cold and clear. Jim was up before dawn, same as always, but this time he wasn't alone. Sarah was already in the kitchen, moving slower than usual, one hand on her back. "You should rest," Jim said. "I've been resting for 3 days in a wagon. I'm done resting." She started the coffee. "When do we leave?" "We don't. I do." Sarah turned, her eyes sharp. "We talked about this." "That was before Victor filed the injunction, before he came here looking for you." Jim kept his voice level. "You stay here. You're safe here." "I'm not safe anywhere, not until Victor's in a cell." Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him. "Besides, you need me. I'm the one who can identify Dr. Cross. I'm the one who saw him give Michael that medicine. I can find him without you." "Can you?" Sarah sat down carefully. "Red Pine's a small town, but it's not that small. Cross could be anywhere. His office, his house, somewhere else entirely. You'd waste half a day searching. I can point him out in 5 minutes." Jim wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in this house and keep her safe and handle Victor himself, but he looked at her face and knew it would be like trying to stop a river with his bare hands. "Fine," he said, "but we do this careful. We go in quiet, we find Cross, we get out. No confrontation with Victor." "Agreed." They left an hour later, Jim on horseback, Sarah in the wagon again, though this time the trip was only 7 miles instead of 3 days. Rafe stayed behind with the crew under strict orders to keep Daniel close and the rifle loaded. Red Pine appeared in the valley below them, small and scattered. 2 streets, maybe 40 buildings, church at one end, saloon at the other. The kind of town that grew up around a crossroads and stayed there, too small to die and too stubborn to grow. They came in from the north, avoiding the main street. Jim tied the horses behind the general store, helped Sarah down from the wagon. "Cross's office is on 2nd Street, Sarah said, above the barber shop." They walked. Jim kept his hand near his rifle, eyes moving over the street. It was early, not many people out. Old Mrs. Henderson sweeping her porch. 2 cowboys heading to breakfast. Nobody paid them much attention. The barber shop was closed. The stairs beside it led up to a narrow door with a brass plate. "Nathan Cross, M.D." Jim knocked. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. "He might be at breakfast," Sarah said, "or he might be gone." Jim looked at the lock, then at the street. Nobody watching. He put his shoulder into the door. It took 3 hits before the wood splintered and the lock gave way. Inside, the office was neat. Too neat. The kind of neat that came from someone packing in a hurry and trying to make it look natural. The desk was clear. The medicine cabinet was empty. The closet held nothing but dust. "He ran," Sarah breathed. Jim went through the desk drawers, found a ledger, flipped through it. Names, dates, treatments, ordinary doctor things. Then, at the back, a separate section. Different handwriting. Initials instead of names. A.H., M.B., and others. "Look at this," Jim showed Sarah. A.H., Anna Holloway. M.B., Michael Brennan. These are the people he poisoned. Sarah read over his shoulder. Her face went pale. "There are 12 names here. 12 people." Jim felt sick. 12 murders. "We have to find him, make him testify." Jim was about to agree when he heard boots on the stairs. Fast, heavy, more than one person. He moved to the door, looked out. Sheriff Cole was coming up, hand on his gun. Behind him, 2 deputies. "Jim Holloway," the sheriff's voice was tired. "Need you to step out here." Jim put himself between the door and Sarah. "What's this about, Henry?" "Breaking and entering? Dr. Cross filed a complaint this morning, said you've been harassing him." "This morning? He's gone. Office is empty." "That's not what his lawyer says." The sheriff looked past Jim, saw Sarah. "Mrs. Brennan, you too. Need you both to come with me." "On what charge?" "Trespassing, destruction of property, assault on a medical professional." The sheriff's voice was flat. He didn't like this. Jim could see it in his face. But he was doing it anyway. "You can explain it to the judge. The circuit judge doesn't come for 2 weeks. Special session, tomorrow morning. Judge Whitmore's presiding." Jim felt the trap close. Victor had known they'd come for Cross, had probably warned Cross, helped him leave, and now he was using the law itself as a weapon. "Henry," Jim said quietly, "you know this is wrong. I know what I'm told." The sheriff's hand stayed on his gun. "Now come peaceful, or I'll have to make you." Jim looked at Sarah, saw her face set with determination, saw her hand go to her belly, protective and fierce. "All right," Jim said. "We'll come." They spent the night in jail, 2 cells side by side, Sarah in one, Jim in the other. The sheriff at least had the decency to give Sarah blankets and a decent meal. Rafe came at dark. The sheriff let him through, stood at a distance while they talked through the bars. "I brought a lawyer," Rafe said. "George Whitmore's son. He's not his father. Will he help?" "He says he'll try, but Jim, the judge is Simon Whitmore, the father, the one Michael Brennan trusted." Rafe's voice was low. "The one who told Victor about the journal." Jim's hands tightened on the bars. "So we're walking into a stacked deck." "Looks like it." "Then we flip the table." Jim glanced at the sheriff, making sure he was out of earshot. "Michael's journal, the survey maps, Dr. Garrett's report. Do you have them?" "Back at the ranch." "Get them. Bring them to the courthouse tomorrow. If Whitmore won't hear us, we'll make enough noise that someone else will." Rafe nodded. "What about you two?" "We'll be fine." Jim looked at Sarah in the next cell. She was lying down, one hand on her belly. "Just keep Daniel safe." "I will." Rafe paused. "Jim, Victor's planning something. I can feel it. He's too calm about all this." "I know." "So what do? We trust that the truth is louder than his lies." Jim met his friend's eyes. "And we make damn sure everyone hears it." Morning came gray and cold. The sheriff brought them breakfast, let them clean up. At 9, he led them across the street to the courthouse, a small building, wood frame, with a courtroom that held maybe 30 people. It was full. Jim stopped in the doorway, staring. Every seat was taken. Ranchers, farmers, townspeople. Faces he recognized, faces he didn't, all of them watching as he and Sarah were led to the defendant's table. At the prosecutor's table, Victor Drummond, not as the plaintiff, but as a witness. Beside him, a lawyer from Helena in an expensive suit. At the bench, Judge Simon Whitmore. 60 years old, gray-haired, with the worn face of a man carrying too much weight. And in the front row, sitting alone, a woman Jim didn't recognize. Thin, dark-haired, with eyes that watched everything. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Whitmore gabbled once, looked at the crowd, and his face was unreadable. The territory versus Holloway and Brennan, charges of trespassing and destruction of property. His voice was steady. How do the defendants plead? Young Whitmore stood. Thomas Whitmore, the judge's son, 25, nervous, but his voice was clear. Not guilty, Your Honor, and we move to dismiss on grounds of unlawful complaint. Explain. The complainant, Dr. Nathan Cross, is not present, cannot be located. We believe he's fled the territory, which suggests consciousness of guilt in a separate matter. The expensive lawyer stood. Your Honor, Dr. Cross's whereabouts are irrelevant. The crime occurred. The damage was done. We have testimony. From who? From Mr. Victor Drummond, who visited Dr. Cross's office this morning and observed the damage. Judge Whitmore looked at Victor. Mr. Drummond, you're a witness? Victor stood, placed his hand on the Bible, was sworn in. His voice was calm, reasonable. Yes, Your Honor. I went to see Dr. Cross this morning on a personal matter. Found his office door broken in. Furniture disturbed. I reported it to Sheriff Cole immediately. Did you see who caused the damage? No, Your Honor. But Mrs. Henderson across the street saw Mr. Holloway and Mrs. Brennan enter the building yesterday morning, and they were the only ones to go up those stairs all day. The judge looked at Jim. Mr. Holloway, did you break into Dr. Cross's office? Jim stood. I did, Your Honor. A murmur ran through the crowd. Why? Because I had reason to believe Dr. Cross had evidence related to the murder of my wife. The murmur became a roar. The judge gabbled for silence. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Holloway. I have proof. Jim nodded to Rafe, who was standing at the back. Rafe came forward, carrying the leather satchel, set it on the defense table. Thomas Whitmore opened it, pulled out Dr. Garrett's report. Your Honor, we have chemical analysis from Dr. Leonard Garrett in Helena, federal physician. He examined medicine given to Anna Holloway by Dr. Cross. The medicine contained arsenic. He handed the report to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Whitmore read. His face went gray. This says the medicine would cause symptoms resembling typhoid fever. That's correct, Your Honor, and Mrs. Holloway died of what Dr. Cross diagnosed as typhoid fever. Thomas pulled out another document. This is Dr. Cross's death certificate, signed by him, stating typhoid as cause of death. The judge looked at Victor. Mr. Drummond, Dr. Cross is your personal physician, is he not? He's treated me, yes. Did you ask him to provide medicine to Mrs. Holloway? Victor's face was smooth. I did, Your Honor, as a courtesy. The ranch is isolated. Mrs. Holloway was suffering from headaches. I thought I was being helpful. Did you know the medicine contained arsenic? Absolutely not. Victor's voice rang with sincerity. I'm as shocked as anyone. If Dr. Cross did this, he did it without my knowledge or consent. Thomas stood again. Your Honor, we also have evidence regarding Michael Brennan, Mrs. Brennan's late husband. We believe he was also poisoned by Dr. Cross on Mr. Drummond's orders. Objection. The expensive lawyer was on his feet. Speculation. No evidence. We have evidence. Thomas pulled out Michael's journal. This journal, kept by Michael Brennan, documents systematic fraud by Mr. Drummond, falsified land surveys, moved boundary markers, water rights theft. He opened the journal, started reading dates and names. The crowd was silent now, absolutely silent. The judge listened. His hands shook slightly as he took the journal, flipped through it. "These are serious accusations," he said quietly. "They're the truth." Sarah stood. Her voice carried through the courtroom. "My husband documented everything, every crime, every theft. He was going to bring this to you, Judge Whitmore, to ask for your help." The judge looked at her. Their eyes met. "I know," he said. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore gavelled for silence, but his voice shook. "I know because he came to me 3 months ago, showed me the journal, asked me to help him bring charges against Mr. Drummond." Victor was very still. "What did you tell him?" Sarah's voice was barely there. "I told him I needed time to review the evidence, to build a case." The judge's face was anguished. "I told him to wait. And then my husband was shot in the street." "Yes." "Because you warned Victor." Sarah's voice was steel now. "Because Victor owns you." "No," the judge stood. "Because Victor owns my son's debts. Because I was a coward who thought I could protect my family by sacrificing yours." The silence was absolute. Judge Whitmore looked at the courtroom, at the faces watching him, at Victor, who sat perfectly still, perfectly calm. "But I'm done being a coward." The judge's voice was stronger now. "Mr. Drummond, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, for fraud, for corruption of a territorial official." Victor smiled. "On what authority, Simon? You're a territorial judge. You have no jurisdiction over federal crimes, and water rights are federal." "Then I'm remanding you to federal custody." The judge looked toward the back of the room. "Marshal?" The woman in the front row stood, pulled back her coat to show a badge. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Catherine Morrison," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. "I've been investigating Mr. Drummond for 6 months on suspicion of fraud, murder, and racketeering. Thank you, Judge Whitmore, for your cooperation." Victor's smile froze. Everything happened fast after that. The marshal's men who'd been scattered through the crowd moved forward. Victor tried to run, made it 3 steps before a deputy tackled him. The expensive lawyer was shouting. The crowd was roaring. The sheriff was trying to maintain order, and Jim just stood there, holding Sarah's hand, watching Victor Drummond get dragged out in chains. "Is it over?" Sarah whispered. "Almost." Jim turned toward the marshal, who was organizing her deputies near the door. "What about Dr. Cross?" Marshal Morrison looked up from her notes. "We've issued a federal warrant. He crossed state lines, which makes it our jurisdiction. We'll find him. And when you do, he'll stand trial, same as Drummond." The marshal's eyes were hard. "Men who kill with medicine think they're clever, think they'll never get caught. But poison leaves traces, and we're very good at following traces." "How long?" Sarah asked. "Could be weeks, could be months. He's smart enough to run, but not smart enough to disappear forever." Morrison tipped her hat. "When we get him, you'll be the first to know." Jim nodded. It wasn't perfect closure, but it was something. Jim looked at Judge Whitmore, who was sitting on the bench with his head in his hands. Then, at the faces in the crowd, anger and relief and justice mixing together. "Not yet," he said, turning back to Sarah. "Sentencing is in a week. Will they hang him?" The marshal took Victor to Helena that same day. Jim and Sarah were released, all charges dropped. Judge Whitmore resigned from the bench before sunset. But it wasn't over. 3 weeks later, Jim sat in a Helena courtroom watching federal prosecutors build their case. The room was packed. Reporters from as far as San Francisco, ranchers from across the territory. And Victor Drummond sitting at the defense table in his fine suit, looking as calm as if he were waiting for tea. Sarah sat beside Jim, 8 months pregnant now, her belly pressing against the rail. The baby was 3 weeks old now, still tiny, but growing stronger every day. Daniel was on her other side, quiet and watchful. Rafe was in the back, along with Walt and Luther. Tommy had stayed at the ranch to keep things running. The prosecutor was a thin man named Andrew Walsh. He had a voice like a preacher and the patience of a hunter. "Mr. Drummond," Walsh said, pacing in front of the witness stand, "you've heard the testimony, Dr. Garrett's chemical analysis. The ledger from Dr. Cross's office. Michael Brennan's journal documenting your fraudulent land surveys. How do you respond? Victor's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Preston, stood. Objection. My client is not required to respond to a catalog of accusations. Ask specific questions. The judge, a federal man from Washington, nodded. Sustained. Mr. Walsh, be specific. Walsh pulled out a paper. Dr. Cross's ledger lists 12 patients, 12 people treated for various ailments. All of them developed symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning. 7 of them died. Mr. Drummond, did you order Dr. Cross to poison these people? No. Did you know he was poisoning them? No. Yet all 12 of these people had one thing in common. They owned land you wanted to acquire. Coincidence. 12 coincidences? Walsh's voice was sharp. Anna Holloway. Her husband owned Stone Creek Ranch. Michael Brennan. He owned water rights you needed. Elena Drummond, your own sister-in-law. She stood between you and your brother's cooperation. All coincidences? Victor's face didn't change. I didn't know Elena was poisoned. I thought she died of cholera. Did you? Walsh walked to his table, picked up another document. This is a letter from Dr. Cross to you, dated April 1884, 1 month before Elena Drummond's death. In it, Cross writes, "The matter we discussed can be handled discreetly. The compound I mentioned will produce the desired symptoms. Payment can be arranged through the usual channels." The courtroom went silent. Victor looked at the letter. Something flickered across his face. Not fear, calculation. That letter could be about anything. Medicine for livestock, treatment for a sick horse. There's no proof it refers to poisoning anyone. The payment Cross mentions, we've traced it. $500 transferred from your account to his 1 week after Elena Drummond died. I pay Dr. Cross a retainer for medical services. $500 is a lot of money for medical services. Dr. Cross is an excellent physician. Walsh stared at him, then he turned to the jury. An excellent physician who's now fled the territory, who's wanted for murder in 3 states, who worked exclusively for Victor Drummond for 3 years. He paused. Gentlemen of the jury, I submit that Dr. Cross didn't act alone. He acted under orders, and those orders came from the man sitting before you. Preston stood. Objection? Speculation? Sustained. But the jury had heard it. Jim could see it in their faces. Doubt turning to certainty. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses came and went. Surveyors testified about moved boundary markers. Ranchers testified about losing their land. Judge Whitmore testified about being blackmailed, about his son's debts, about the moment he chose his family over justice. That testimony broke something in the courtroom. The judge's voice shook when he described telling Michael Brennan to wait, to be patient, knowing Victor would use that time to kill him. I thought I could protect my son, Whitmore said. His face was gray. I thought if I just gave Victor what he wanted, he'd leave us alone. But men like Victor Drummond are never satisfied. They just keep taking. Sarah testified on the 2nd day. She walked to the stand slowly, one hand on her belly, sat down carefully, and then, in a voice that didn't waver, she told the jury about Michael, about the journal he kept, about the maps he found, about the headaches that started after he saw Dr. Cross. My husband was a good man, she said. He believed in the law, believed justice existed. He died believing someone would care enough to stop Victor Drummond. She looked directly at Victor as she said it. Victor looked back with eyes like stones. Jim testified last. He told them about Anna, about the doctor who came to the ranch, about the medicine for headaches, about the fever that took her in 5 days. I trusted that medicine, Jim said. His hands gripped the rail. I gave it to her myself, morning and night, just like the bottle said, and I watched her die. His voice broke. The courtroom was silent. Mr. Holloway, Walsh said gently, if you'd known the medicine contained poison, would you have given it to your wife? No. Would any reasonable person? No. So the only way that medicine ended up in your wife's hands was through deception. Someone had to lie about what it was. Yes. Who brought it to your ranch? Dr. Cross. But he said Victor Drummond sent it. As a courtesy. Walsh turned to the jury. As a courtesy. Victor Drummond sent poisoned medicine to Anna Holloway as a courtesy, and when she died, he tried to buy her husband's land. Preston objected. The judge sustained. But again, the jury had heard. On the third day, Rafe testified. He walked to the stand like a man going to his execution, took the oath with a steady hand, and then he looked at his brother for the first time since the trial started. "Raphael Drummond," Walsh said. "You're the defendant's brother." "Yes." "You worked for him for 10 years." "Yes." "Tell the jury what you saw." Rafe was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice filled the courtroom. "Victor doesn't kill people himself. He's too smart for that. He hires people, pays them well, gives them what they need to do the job quietly." Rafe's eyes stayed on Victor. "I watched him do it for a decade. Watched him destroy ranchers, farmers, anyone who stood in his way. He'd find their weakness, their debts, their secrets, their families, and he'd use it." "Did he ever order you to hurt someone?" "Yes." "Who?" "A homesteader named James Carlson. He owned a spring Victor wanted. Victor told me to burn his barn, make it look like an accident, scare him into selling." "Did you do it?" "No, I refused. That's when he went after Elena." Preston stood. "Objection. The witness is speculating about his brother's motives." "I'm not speculating," Rafe said before the judge could rule. "I know because Victor told me. He said, 'If you won't help me, I'll find another way to motivate you.'" "What happened to Elena?" Walsh asked. "She got sick 2 weeks later, died within a month. Doctor said cholera." Rafe's voice was flat. "But we didn't have cholera in the territory that year. Nobody else got sick. Just Elena." "What did you do?" "I left. Took my horse and rode until I couldn't see his land anymore. Because I knew if I stayed, if I said anything, I'd be next." Victor leaned forward, whispered to Preston. The lawyer shook his head, but Victor kept talking, urgent now. "Mr. Drummond," the judge said, "your brother is testifying. You'll have a chance to respond. Sit down." Victor sat, but his face was no longer calm. Something was breaking through. Anger, maybe, or fear. Walsh turned back to Rafe. "In your 10 years working for Victor Drummond, how many people died under suspicious circumstances?" "I can't say for certain, but at least 20, maybe more." 20 people, at least." The courtroom erupted. The judge gabbled for silence, but it took minutes to restore order. When it was quiet again, Walsh said, "No further questions." Preston stood for cross-examination. He was good. He picked at Rafe's testimony, looking for holes, asked why Rafe hadn't come forward sooner, why he'd run instead of fighting, why the jury should believe a man who'd worked for a criminal for a decade. Rafe answered every question with the same flat calm. "I didn't come forward because I was scared. I ran because I wanted to live, and the jury should believe me because I have nothing to gain by lying. Victor's my brother. Testifying against him makes me a traitor to my own blood, but I'd rather be a traitor than a murderer." Preston sat down. The prosecution rested. Victor's defense was simple. He didn't know what Dr. Cross was doing. The payments were for legitimate medical services. The letter could mean anything. The land acquisitions were legal, documented, approved by the territorial government. "My client is a businessman," Preston told the jury. "A successful one. Success breeds envy. Envy breeds accusations. But accusations are not proof, and in America, we don't convict people based on accusations. We require evidence." He pointed at the evidence table. "You see a lot of paper there, reports, journals, letters. But what you don't see is a single witness who can testify that Victor Drummond personally poisoned anyone, because he didn't. At most, you have proof that Dr. Cross committed crimes, and Dr. Cross isn't here to defend himself." It was a good argument. Jim could see some of the jury nodding, but Walsh stood for rebuttal. "Mr. Preston is right. We don't have proof that Victor Drummond personally poisoned anyone, because men like Victor Drummond don't get their hands dirty. They hire others to do it. But the law recognizes something called conspiracy. When you hire someone to commit a crime, when you pay them to do it, when you benefit from it, you're just as guilty as if you'd done it yourself." He walked to the jury box. Victor Drummond wanted land. He wanted water. He wanted power. And when people stood in his way, they died. 12 people, maybe 20, maybe more. All of them obstacles, all of them removed, all of them conveniently sick, conveniently dead, and their land conveniently available for purchase. Walsh's voice rose. Gentlemen, that's not coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's murder. Calculated, patient, systematic murder. And the man who ordered it is sitting right there. He pointed at Victor. Find him guilty, because if you don't, if you let him walk out of here free, then you're telling every other Victor Drummond in this territory that murder is acceptable, that fraud is acceptable, that you can kill with poison instead of bullets and call it business. Walsh sat down. The judge gave the jury their instructions. They filed out. Jim watched them go. 12 men, farmers and merchants, and 1 teacher, holding Victor Drummond's fate in their hands. Sarah reached for Jim's hand. He held it tight. How long do you think? She whispered. I don't know. It took 4 hours. When the jury filed back in, Jim couldn't read their faces. They sat down. The foreman, a rancher named Douglas, stood with a paper in his hand. Have you reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Anna Holloway, how do you find? Guilty. Sarah's hand tightened on Jim's. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Michael Brennan, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of fraud and falsification of territorial land surveys? Guilty. The judge read through all 12 counts. 12 guilty verdicts. The courtroom was silent except for the judge's voice and the scratch of the court reporter's pen. When it was done, the judge looked at Victor. Mr. Drummond, you've been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be in 1 week. Until then, you'll be remanded to federal custody. No bail. He gabbled once. This court is adjourned. Marshals moved forward, put chains on Victor's wrists, on his ankles, led him toward the door. Victor stopped, turned, looked across the courtroom at Rafe. For a moment, the brothers just stared at each other. 10 years of history, blood and betrayal, and the choices that break families apart. Then Victor smiled, cold, empty. You'll regret this, Raphael. Family is all we have, and you just destroyed ours. No, Rafe said quietly. You did that when you killed Elena. Victor was led away. Jim stood, helped Sarah to her feet. Around them, people were talking, reporters shouting questions, but it all felt distant, unreal. It's done, Sarah said. Her voice was barely there. Almost. Jim looked toward the marshal, who was giving orders to her deputies. What about Dr. Cross? Marshal Morrison turned. We've issued a federal warrant. He crossed state lines, which makes it our jurisdiction. We'll find him. And when you do, he'll stand trial, same as Drummond. The marshal's eyes were hard. Men who kill with medicine think they're clever, think they'll never get caught. But poison leaves traces, and we're very good at following traces. How long? Sarah asked. Could be weeks, could be months. He's smart enough to run, but not smart enough to disappear forever. Morrison tipped her hat. When we get him, you'll be the first to know. Jim nodded. It wasn't perfect closure, but it was something. Not yet, he said, turning back to Sarah. Sentencing is in a week. Will they hang him? I don't know. Maybe. Or life in prison. Jim paused. Does it matter? Sarah thought about it. About Michael, about the baby she was carrying, about justice and revenge and the difference between them. I think it does, she said, because hanging him would make him a martyr. Prison makes him forgotten, and I want him forgotten. They walked out of the courthouse into gray afternoon light. Rafe was waiting on the steps alone. Walt and Luther had gone to find a hotel for the night. You all right? Jim asked. Rafe looked at the courthouse door. I just testified against my own brother. Put him in prison for the rest of his life. No, I'm not all right. You did the right thing. Did I? Rafe's voice was raw, because it doesn't feel right. It feels like I just killed the last piece of my family. He killed Elena. I know. Rafe turned away. I know that. But knowing it doesn't make it hurt less. Jim didn't have an answer for that, so he just stood there while Rafe walked away, shoulders bent, carrying the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Sarah watched him go. He's going to leave, isn't he? After the sentencing. I think so. Will you try to stop him? Jim thought about it. About Rafe's 5 years at Stone Creek Ranch. About the quiet competence, the steady work, the friendship built in silence. No, he said. If he needs to go, I'll let him go. They stood on the courthouse steps while the afternoon turned to evening and Helena lit its lamps around them. 1 week later, they returned for sentencing. The courtroom was less crowded this time. Most of the reporters had left, stories filed, attention moved on. But the families were there. Widows and children of the people Victor had killed. They filled the front rows, silent and watching. Victor was brought in wearing prison gray. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like conviction had taken something physical from him. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Mr. Drummond, the judge said, you've been convicted of 12 counts of conspiracy to commit murder and 17 counts of fraud. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say? Victor stood. For a moment, Jim thought he might apologize, might show some remorse, some recognition of what he'd done. Instead, Victor said, I built this territory. I brought capital, infrastructure, progress. Small ranchers like Jim Holloway, they're relics of the past. Inefficient, wasteful. I was trying to modernize, to make this land productive. The judge's face hardened. You murdered 12 people. I created opportunities. The people who died, they were obstacles. And in business, you remove obstacles. Victor's voice was calm, rational, like he was explaining something obvious. I'm not a monster, I'm a visionary, and history will prove me right. The silence that followed was absolute. The judge looked at Victor for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was cold. Mr. Drummond, I've been a federal judge for 20 years. I've sentenced thieves, killers, men who committed crimes that would turn your stomach. But I have never, in all those years, met someone as coldly calculating as you. You don't see people. You see resources. And that makes you more dangerous than any common murderer. He picked up his gavel. On the 12 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, I sentence you to life in prison, no possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your natural life in federal custody. On the counts of fraud, I add an additional 20 years to run consecutively. He gavelled once. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Marshals took Victor away. He didn't resist, didn't look back, just walked out with the same calm he'd had walking in. Outside, Jim found Rafe standing by the horses. He had his saddlebags packed. You're leaving now? Jim asked. No point waiting. Rafe tied down his gear. Nothing for me here now. There's the ranch. There's work. There's ghosts. Rafe turned to face him. Jim, I can't stay in that territory. Every time I look at those mountains, I'll see Victor. Every time I ride past his land, I'll remember what I did. You stopped a killer. I betrayed my brother. Rafe's voice was flat. Both those things are true, and I can't live with both of them in the same place. Jim understood. Didn't like it, but understood. Where will you go? California, maybe Oregon, somewhere I've never been. Rafe swung into the saddle. Take care of Sarah, and that baby, and Daniel. I will. Rafe looked down at him. And Jim, thank you for giving me a place when I didn't have one, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for being the kind of man who fights back. You could stay, help me rebuild. No. Rafe gathered his reins. You don't need me for that. You've got everything you need already. He rode away. Jim watched until he disappeared around a corner, then turned and went to find Sarah. She was sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, one hand on her belly. Daniel was beside her, reading. He left, Jim said. Sarah nodded. I know, I saw him pack. I should have stopped him. You couldn't. Some people need to keep moving. It's how they survive. She looked up at Jim. Are we going home now? Home. Stone Creek Ranch. The house, the barn, the creek running clear and cold. The place they'd fought for. Yeah, Jim said. We're going home. The ride back took 3 days. They traveled slow, stopping often for Sarah's sake. On the second night, camped by a stream, Sarah woke Jim in the dark. Something's wrong, she whispered. Jim was up immediately. What? The baby. It's coming. It's too early. You're only 8 months. Tell that to the baby. Sarah gripped his hand as a contraction hit. "Jim, we're 2 days from town. We're not going to make it." Jim looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere. No doctor, no midwife, just him and Sarah and Daniel sleeping by the fire. "I'll ride for help," he said. "There's no time." Another contraction, stronger. "You're going to have to do this." Jim had helped birth calves, foals, even a few lambs, but a human baby was different. A human baby was Sarah, in pain, trusting him not to fail. "All right," he said. His voice was steadier than he felt. "All right, tell me what to do." She did. Between contractions, she walked him through it. What to expect, what to watch for, when to worry. Jim built up the fire, boiled water, laid out blankets, woke Daniel and sent him to watch the horses, to stay clear. The labor lasted 4 hours. Sarah was strong, stronger than Jim had ever seen anyone be. She didn't scream, didn't cry out, just breathed through the pain and pushed when her body told her to push. And then, just before dawn, a baby's cry split the night. A girl, tiny, red-faced, perfect. Jim cut the cord with shaking hands, wrapped the baby in his coat, placed her in Sarah's arms. Sarah looked down at her daughter and started crying. "She's early," Sarah whispered. "Is she all right?" Jim checked. 10 fingers, 10 toes, breathing strong, small, but healthy. "She's perfect," he said. Sarah held the baby close. "Anna Margaret Brennan." Jim felt something in his chest crack open. "Anna, if that's all right." "It's more than all right." Jim sat beside Sarah, looked at the baby. Anna would have loved her. Daniel came over, cautious, looked at the tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. "That's my sister?" he asked. "If you'll have her," Sarah said. Daniel reached out one finger. The baby grabbed it with her whole hand. "She's strong," Daniel said, wonder in his voice. "She's got to be," Sarah said. "She's got a long road ahead." They stayed there by the fire until full morning. Then, carefully, they packed up and continued home. Jim riding ahead, Sarah in the wagon with the baby, Daniel walking alongside. When they came over the rise and saw Stone Creek Ranch below them, Jim felt something settle in his chest. Relief, belonging, home. Walt was in the yard. He saw them coming, ran to meet them. "Boss, Mrs. Sarah, you're back." Then he saw the bundle in Sarah's arms. "Is that—" "A girl," Sarah said. "Anna Margaret." Walt's weathered face split in a grin. "Well, I'll be damned. A baby. Luther, Tommy, get out here." The crew poured out of the barn, surrounded the wagon, took turns looking at the baby, their rough faces going soft. "She's tiny," Tommy said. "She's perfect," Luther corrected. They carried Sarah inside, set her up in Jim's room, the big room upstairs. The crew brought warm water, clean blankets, food. Fussed over Sarah and the baby until Sarah laughed and told them to go do some actual work. Jim found himself in the kitchen that evening making coffee. Daniel came in, sat at the table. "Pa?" Daniel's voice was quiet. "Yeah, son?" "Are you going to marry Mrs. Sarah?" Jim's hand stopped on the coffee pot. "Why do you ask?" "Because she's living here, and she has a baby, and you look at her different now." "Different how?" "Like Ma used to look at you." Daniel's eyes were serious. "Like she matters." Jim sat down across from his son. "Would that be all right with you, if I married Sarah?" Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. "I think Ma would want you to," he said finally. "She wouldn't want you to be alone. And Sarah's kind. She doesn't try to be Ma, she just tries to be herself." "That's what I think too. So you should ask her." Daniel stood. "Before she figures out she can do better." Jim almost laughed. "You think I'm not good enough for her?" "I think she walked 7 miles in a blizzard, fought Victor Drummond, and had a baby in the wilderness. You better ask her soon before she realizes how tough she is." Get to Chapter 6, Stone Creek Home. Jim waited 2 weeks, let Sarah recover from the birth, let the baby settle, let the ranch get back to its rhythm. Then, on a Sunday evening, after supper, after the crew had gone to the bunkhouse and Daniel had taken the baby upstairs, Jim found Sarah on the porch. She was in the rocking chair Anna used to love, looking out at the mountains turning purple in the sunset. Jim sat on the porch rail. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "What are your plans for the future?" Sarah looked at him. "That's a broad question. Let me be more specific." Jim's heart was beating fast. "Do your plans include staying here, at Stone Creek?" "I don't know. Do they include me staying?" "They do if you want them to." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Jim Holloway, are you asking me to stay on as your cook?" "No." Jim took a breath. "I'm asking you to stay as my wife." The words hung in the evening air. Sarah's eyes went wide. "You want to marry me, if you'll have me." "Why?" "Because you're brave and strong, and you make the best biscuits I've ever tasted." Jim's voice was rough. "Because Daniel talks to you in a way he hasn't talked to anyone since Anna died. Because when I think about the future, I can't picture it without you in it. I have a baby, another man's baby. Anna Margaret is yours. That makes her mine too, if you let me be her father." Sarah's eyes were bright. "I don't love you, not yet. I'm still learning how to breathe without Michael." "I know, and I'm still learning how to live without Anna." Jim held her gaze. "But I think we could learn together. No rush, no expectations. Just two people trying to build something good out of what's left." Sarah looked out at the mountains, at the ranch, at the life spread out before them. "I'd want to keep Michael's name," she said, "for Anna Margaret. She should know her father." "Of course." "And I'd want time to grieve properly, to figure out who I am without being someone's wife. Take all the time you need. And I won't pretend to be Anna. I won't try to fill her shoes. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to walk beside me, as yourself." Sarah turned to look at him, really look at him. This man who'd taken her in when she had nothing, who'd fought Victor Drummond, who'd delivered her baby in the wilderness and never asked for anything in return. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said, "when we've had time to know what we're building." Jim felt disappointment, then understanding. She was right. They needed time. 6 months, he agreed. Sarah smiled. "And Jim, thank you for asking, for wanting this. It means more than you know." The 6 months passed like water over stone, slowly, shaping things. Sarah stayed in the big upstairs room. Jim stayed in the room across the hall. They lived like partners, not lovers, raising Anna Margaret together, teaching Daniel, running the ranch. Slowly, the grief began to ease. Not gone, just less sharp, less consuming. Sarah started singing while she cooked, old hymns, the same ones Anna used to sing. The first time Jim heard it, he stopped in the hallway, listening, waiting for the pain. It came, but it was gentle, bittersweet, the sound of healing. Daniel turned 10. He was taller now, growing into the man he'd become. He helped with Anna Margaret, teaching her to grab his finger, making her laugh. Jim watched his son hold the baby and saw Anna in every gentle movement. The crew became family. Walt, Luther, Tommy. They ate together, worked together, celebrated together. When Luther's pardon came through, official and stamped, they had a party that lasted until dawn. "I'm a free man," Luther kept saying, his voice full of wonder. A free man. Walt got a letter from his daughter Clara. She'd heard about the trial, about Walt's testimony, about the stand he'd finally taken. "I'd like to visit," the letter said, "if you'd have me." Walt cried when he read it, great silent tears running down his weathered face. She came in the spring, a woman of 40 with her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. She stayed a week. Walt showed her the ranch, introduced her to everyone, talked more than Jim had ever heard him talk. When she left, Walt stood at the gate watching her wagon disappear. "She's coming back," he told Jim, "at Christmas, with her husband and kids." "That's good, Walt." "Yeah," Walt's voice was thick. "It's real good." Tommy grew into his role, became the best wrangler the ranch had ever seen, turned 18 and asked if he could stay on permanent. "This is home," he told Jim, "if you'll have me. Your family, Tommy. You can stay as long as you want." 6 months to the day after Jim proposed, he asked Sarah again. They were by the creek. Anna Margaret was sleeping in a basket. Daniel was fishing upstream. The afternoon was warm, the first real warmth of spring. "Sarah Brennan," Jim said, "I asked you a question 6 months ago. I'd like to ask it again." Sarah looked up from the baby. "Go ahead." "Will you marry me?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with those brown eyes that had seen too much grief and were learning, slowly, to see Joy again. Yes, she said, I will. They married in June. Small ceremony, pastor from Red Pine, the crew standing up with them, Daniel holding Anna Margaret, who was 6 months old and grabbing at everything. Walt gave Sarah away. My honor, he said gruffly. Luther stood as Jim's best man. About time, he muttered when Jim took Sarah's hand. The vows were simple, traditional. When Jim said, I do, he meant it with everything he had. When Sarah said it back, her voice was strong. They kissed. The crew cheered. Anna Margaret laughed. And Jim thought about Anna, about how she would have loved this, would have loved Sarah, would have loved seeing Daniel happy again, would have approved of this new family built from the ashes of the old. The party lasted all day. They roasted a pig. Walt played fiddle. Luther danced with Clara, who'd come back with her family. Daniel taught Anna Margaret to clap in time with the music. As the sun set, Jim and Sarah stood on the porch, watching their family celebrate. Happy? Jim asked. Getting there, Sarah said. She was holding Anna Margaret, who was fighting sleep. Ask me again in a year. I will. 1 year later, Jim asked. Sarah said yes again, even happier this time. 2 years later, Sarah was pregnant again. A boy, born in winter. They named him Michael James. Michael for Sarah's first husband, James for Jim. Daniel, now 11, held his baby brother with the careful competence of someone who'd helped raise Anna Margaret. He's loud, Daniel observed. All babies are loud, Sarah said, laughing. Was I loud? You were the loudest, Jim said. Anna used to say you could wake the dead. Daniel smiled. It was easier now talking about Anna. The grief was still there, but it lived alongside the joy instead of crushing it. 3 years after the wedding, Judge Whitmore died. His son Thomas had taken over his practice, become a respected lawyer. He rode to Stone Creek Ranch to deliver the news personally. My father wanted you to know, Thomas said. He never forgave himself for what happened to Michael Brennan, for choosing fear over courage. He made it right in the end, Sarah said. Did he? Thomas looked uncertain. He testified, but he didn't stop it from happening. He didn't save your husband. No, but he saved others. By testifying, by exposing Victor, he made sure no one else died the same way. Sarah's voice was gentle. That's redemption, Thomas. Not perfect, but real. Thomas left lighter than he'd arrived. 3 months after Victor's sentencing, a telegram arrived from Marshal Morrison. Dr. Cross apprehended Chicago. Stop attempted boarding ship to Liverpool. Stop extradition underway. Stop. Jim read it aloud to Sarah over breakfast. They got him, she said, her hand stilled on the coffee pot. The trial was short. Dr. Cross, faced with the ledger, the chemical analysis, and testimony from 3 survivors, pleaded guilty. Life in prison, same as Victor. No possibility of parole. It's strange, Sarah said the night they got word. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but I just feel tired. Because revenge doesn't give you energy back, Jim said. It just stops draining it. Cross died 2 years into his sentence. Influenza, the prison doctor reported. The same fever he'd falsely diagnosed in so many others. Sarah didn't send flowers. She simply closed that chapter. Let them rest now, she said quietly. All of them. 4 years after the wedding, they got word from the federal prison. Victor Drummond was dead. Heart failure, the doctor said. Quick and quiet in the night. Jim felt nothing when he heard. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a kind of hollow emptiness where anger used to be. Sarah took it harder. She went to the room she'd first stayed in, sat on the bed, and cried for reasons she couldn't quite name. Jim found her there. I thought I'd feel free, she said. I thought when he died, I'd finally be able to let go of Michael, but I just feel empty. Because revenge doesn't fill the hole, Jim said. It just makes it different shaped. Then what does fill it? Jim looked toward the window, at the ranch, at their life. This, he said, every day, building something good. That's what fills it. 5 years after the wedding, Daniel turned 17, tall now, broad through the shoulders, with Anna's eyes and Jim's stubborn jaw. I want to go to college, he said at dinner one night. The table went quiet. College meant leaving, meant the East, meant a life far from the ranch. What would you study? Sarah asked. Law. I want to be a lawyer like Thomas Whitmore. Help people who can't help themselves. Jim felt pride and sorrow mixed together, his son wanting to fight the same fight, but wanting to do it with words instead of fists. "It's expensive," Jim said. "I'll work, save money, maybe go in a few years." "Or," Jim said slowly, "you could go now, and we'll figure out the money." Daniel stared. "But, Pa, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Jim looked at his son. "Anna would have wanted this. She always said you were meant for something bigger than ranching." Daniel's eyes went bright. "You really mean it?" "I do." Daniel left for university that fall, Harvard. He wrote letters home about his classes, his professors, the strange new world of the East, about missing the mountains but loving the learning. Jim kept every letter, read them aloud to Sarah at night while she sewed, and Anna Margaret played on the floor and Michael James tried to steal the cookies meant for tomorrow. 6 years after the wedding, Anna Margaret took her first steps, not to Sarah, not to Jim, to the portrait of Anna Holloway that hung in the front room. She toddled over, grabbed the frame, looked up at the painted face. "Mama," she said. Sarah's breath caught, but before she could correct her, Jim knelt beside Anna Margaret. "No, sweetheart, that's your namesake, Anna Holloway. She was my first wife." "Where is she?" "She died before you were born, but she was a good woman, kind and brave. You're named after her because we want you to be like her." Anna Margaret looked at the portrait, then at Sarah. "I have 2 mamas?" "In a way," Sarah said softly. "One who gave you her name, one who gave you life." Anna Margaret seemed to accept this. She toddled back to Sarah, climbed into her lap, and promptly fell asleep. Jim looked at his wife, at the child in her arms, at the portrait on the wall. "I think Anna would approve," he said. "I think so too." 7 years after the wedding, they got a letter from Rafe, postmarked from California. He'd married, he wrote, a widow with 2 children. They were ranching near Sacramento, building a life. "I think about Stone Creek sometimes," the letter said, "about the family I had there. I'm sorry I left, but I wasn't ready to stay. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to visit. Until then, know that I'm well, and I'm grateful." Jim wrote back, told him about the ranch, about Daniel at Harvard, about Anna Margaret and Michael James, about the life they'd built. "The door's always open," Jim wrote. "Family doesn't stop being family just because you're far away." He never heard back, but he hoped the letter found Rafe, hoped it gave him peace. 8 years after the wedding, the government returned the land Victor had stolen. 15 ranches, their boundaries restored to the original surveys. The homesteaders who'd lost everything got it back. Stone Creek Ranch's boundaries were confirmed, the water rights made permanent. The creek would run through Holloway land for as long as there were Holloways to work it. Jim stood by the creek that day, watching water flow over stone, thinking about all the blood spilled over this water, all the lives lost. "Was it worth it?" Sarah asked beside him. "I don't know, but we're here, and they're not, and maybe that's all the answer we get." 10 years after the wedding, Daniel graduated from Harvard, came home for the summer, tall and educated, and still fundamentally the same boy who'd held his baby sister and learned to forgive his father. "I'm joining a law firm in Helena," he said, "working on territorial reform, making sure what happened with Victor can't happen again." "Your mother would be proud," Jim said. "Both of them," Sarah added. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, both of them." He left at summer's end, but he came back often, for holidays, for birthdays, for the quiet moments when a man needs to see the mountains that made him. Jim stood on the porch one evening, 10 years after marrying Sarah. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Sarah came out to join him, her hair showing streaks of silver now, her hands marked by a decade of work and care. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Jim looked out at the ranch, at the barn where Walt was still working at 72, at the creek running clear and cold, at the land that had cost so much and given back even more. "About how I thought my life was over when Anna died. I thought I'd lost everything worth having. And now? Now I know I was wrong." Jim pulled Sarah close. "Life doesn't end when you lose something. It just changes. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to let it, it changes into something better than you imagined." Sarah leaned against him. "Better." "Different," Jim amended. "Not better than Anna. Not worse, just different. And good in its own way." Behind them, Anna Margaret was teaching Michael James to read at the kitchen table. Their voices drifted through the open window, mixing with the evening sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. "I love you," Sarah said. "I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you too." Jim kissed the top of her head. "And I'm grateful. For every day. For everything we built." "We're not done building." "No?" "Anna Margaret wants to go to medical school. Michael James wants to expand the herd. Daniel wants to change territorial law." Sarah smiled. "We've got a lot more building ahead of us." "Then we better get to work." They stood together on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one. The Montana night was cold and clear. Stone Creek flowed on, carrying the past into the future. Jim thought about Victor Drummond sometimes, about poison and power and the cost of justice. But mostly he thought about this, family and land, and the simple act of building something that lasts. "No regrets?" Sarah asked. "None that matter," Jim said. And it was true. There were things he'd change if he could. Anna would still be alive. Michael Brennan would still be alive. The 12 people Victor killed would still be alive. But he couldn't change the past. He could only build the future. And that's what he'd done. Brick by brick, day by day. One biscuit, one sunset, one choice at a time. Stone Creek Ranch stood solid against the Montana sky. The door opened behind them, and their children called them in to supper. Jim followed Sarah inside, to the kitchen where it all began, to the table surrounded by family, to the life they'd fought for and won. The door closed, the mountains stood watch, and Stone Creek flowed on, endless and eternal and free. The end.